Hey guys, what's up? Wanted to talk with you a little bit about collecting and some of the issues that are associated with it. For those of you who read the blog, you'll probably recognize this because I published a post about it just a couple days ago. Collecting is one of those things that's really easy to get into. Especially in modern society. I'm not just talking about modern American society. I think that it's really a global phenomenon. I mean, from what I've seen, you see a lot of the same sort of thing happen everywhere around the world where we fall in love with whatever it is, some sort of item or object or something like that, and we want to have more of it, have a complete collection of it. We think that it looks nice on the shelves. We think that it does, good things for us in terms of making us look like we're richer than we really are, that we're more intelligent than we really are, or whatever it is you want to make of it. It's something, like I said, that comes very, very natural, something that you don't really notice until you start seeing it and you start really thinking about it. And it is something that's somewhat problematic in society. I mean, you get people who will spend a lot of money on things that they don't really need. Including people like me, and people who hope for some sort of that some sort of ostentatious display of wealth will somehow make them better, more popular, or whatever it is. I think that YouTube actually is a very good example of how problematic this can be, where you get people who will create videos of them driving like nice sports cars or attending expensive sporting events or doing other things that are quite ostentatious without having the money, in hopes that the money will come afterwards to help pay off the credit card bill and the debt that they have just incurred, right? And we know all about numerous examples of people who failed at doing this very thing, right? So the reason why I talk about this is because collecting really can get us in our own industry. Like I've said, I've had my own issues with collecting in a sense that is very difficult to distinguish from hoarding, the awful H word. And the worst of the experiences I think I've had came really when I was younger. I started off from an early age, right? I had baseball cards back before I really could read. And I used to love taking them and sorting them and looking at them, as a child. Probably when I was in elementary school, I would read books about baseball cards. One of my favorites back then was called Baseball Card Questions and Answers, which I had a copy of for a while, and I think I do have an electronic copy of somewhere. If you sit down and read it, you'd wonder why in the world this young child would want to read what is basically a trivia book for people interested in the specific collecting industry. But that's just sort of the way that things were. I kind of liked the idea of having it, and I would dream from time to time about the possibility of owning a box of unopened 52 tops or something. I mean, something that was impossible, that simply didn't exist, right? Because of how cool the cards were and how neat it would be to have some sort of relic from the past for whatever reason. I mean, this is the thing, right? The utility of this sort of thing, and the dream and all this stuff, it starts to fall apart when you start thinking about, why do I want this? Why do I want to do this? And you're like, oh yeah, maybe it's not really worth that much after all. And that usually is the problem with collecting, in that we start to collect things that have no value at all. Now, old baseball cards do have value to certain people, but as always, it's only worth what other people are going to pay for it. I've collected other things since. I collected books for a long time. You can see behind me, I do have, it's this hand. I do have a number of books still on the shelf. There's nothing like it once was. I used to have far too many. I got rid of a lot of them. That's because I discovered the old Marie Kondo method, the Kondo Marie. I read that book back in 2017, I think it was. I was actually scared to read it at first because I had a feeling that it would make me want to change things in my life. And it was right. It made me want to change things. And I think it still makes me want to change things and think about where I spend my time, what I put my emphasis on, and what I do with my day and what kind of person I really want to be. What we're talking about is stuff that's pretty heady when you get down to it as well. My maternal grandfather passed away not long ago, just about a month and a half ago. And my mom's been up trying to clean through the stuff that was left behind. And so I don't know about the rest of you. I know that I have a viewership that has a large age range from people a little bit younger than me to people who are older than my parents. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about this, but when you deal with the death, especially of a beloved family member, you realize that the end of life for those who survive comes with a lot of stuff to clean up and a lot of goods. and there can be questions as to whether the good is worth anything or not, whether it's worth selling it or just get rid of it all. This is the sort of thing I actually think about quite a bit, and I think, man, if I want to leave, a heritage or something for my offspring, I would rather leave something that's more personal than a bunch of stuff, a bunch of books or a bunch of papers or whatever. I mean, who cares? Even if you say, well, papers, what if you're an important person? What if you're Bill James or someone like that, right? Somebody who wrote a lot and did a lot of work. Well, even then, I mean, do you really want to have people going through all your scrap papers and looking at up stuff and all this other stuff? No, you want to have produced something with your knowledge and with your papers that can be somewhat permanent, at least have some kind of influence on the world, instead of just having a whole bunch of loose paper sitting around that your poor kids have to sort through. That's sort of the mentality that I come from, right now. I did have a large collection of cards from various games, and I did have to sell them when we came back to the United States from living abroad for several years. I had these in storage, and we came back and we're living in a small apartment. There were 5 of us. I got 3 kids, and we had 2 pets. And we were in a little apartment that was about 1,400 square feet, maybe. All of the APBA cards, the Strat cards, the Pursue the Pennant cards, all that other stuff had to go. And so I sold it bit by bit on eBay, which also, by the way, helped us pay for the rent. Those were quite difficult times. So that's kind of the approach that I have from this, right? I'm not a huge collector right now, and I prefer, instead of like having a bunch of stuff on the shelf, I prefer to like dig into it and say like, okay, so what can I learn from this? What is this going to teach me, and how can I use this to better myself, and then create or produce something that can help better the people around me? There is, however, another problem with collecting, right? So the idea behind a lot of these collections is, I'm going to buy this thing that for whatever reason is precious to me today, and at some point in time in the future, this might be worth more money than what I'm paying for it now, right? Basically, investing that is disguised as collecting, but it's not really collecting. It's not that, you want a copy of every single one of X. Instead, you want a whole bunch of unopened copies of this particular good in hopes that scarcity will cause it to increase in value, right? I've mentioned before, and I talk about this on the blog, I spend time every now and then reading up on Magic the Gathering, especially the financial side of Magic the Gathering, which is interesting to me. And I can tell you that more modern card sets do not appreciate in value quite the same as older sets do. And the reason why is because there are a lot more people collecting. And whereas once upon a time you could get a booster box or something and keep it in the closet for 5 years and then sell it and make 3 times your money, it's not quite the same anymore because you got a lot of booster box and a lot of closets to compete with. And that's kind of the point here. So we're going to go back here very, very briefly to what the old days of the APBA journal. I mean, the old days, January 1975. I was like minus 9 years old back then, so I don't remember it very well. When we go through here, this is back during the early days of reprinting of APBA cards, and there was a lot of controversy about that. We'll talk about all of that a little bit later. When we dig on into this, though, there is a feature that I've always wanted to talk about. So here's a little bit about the collection value of APBA. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, too. We have a ways to go before we get to that. This, though, is the one that I want to talk about, right? So my apologies if you're still alive, Mr. Terry of Severn, Maryland. I actually don't know where Severn is. It's probably not too far from where we live. He purchased 10 mint 1949 APBA baseball sets and has stocked away mint editions of 1963, 14 copies, 1964, 6 copies, 68, 12 copies, 70, 24 copies, 71, 11 copies, 72, 11 copies, and 73, 10 copies. So he has 98 APBA sets at this time. Remember, this is written probably late 1974. He estimates that the total book value is about $1,000. But a conservative estimate of the collection's present market value is probably closer to $2,500, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, right? You know how many 1949 APBA sets have been on the market recently today? I mean, you're not getting the sort of money he thinks he's getting from these, right? I mean, you really think that, I know $2,500, you got, about 100 sets, so we're looking at like maybe $25 a set or something like that. You can probably get a nice looking 49 set for less than $25 today. Now 63, 64 might be harder to have, but I used to have a 68, 70, 71, 72, and 73. I sold them all, and I don't think I got much more than maybe $30 for them because there's a lot on the market. Why is there a lot on the market? Because David Terry wasn't the only person doing this back then. And David Terry thought that this was a good investment, not realizing that on the other hand, you have to get 24 other people willing to buy the 1970 set. And what do you do with this stuff in the meantime, right? You have it in a box somewhere, or you have it in your closet somewhere, taking up space and just sitting there. And then you have to worry about, oh, well, are bugs going to get into it? Are the cards going to start getting eaten away, right? What is the humidity like here? Is things going to, just mold away? I've seen all sorts of crazy stuff like that happen, Or you can go to a more like desert climate, go over to like Arizona, back to Utah, New Mexico. You could live over there and store all of your cards in theory. But, you still have the problem of who in their right mind is going to want to purchase this stuff in the end. And that's really what the problem is, and that's the thing I want to call attention to, which is that as much as you might think that, this cool thing that I have is something that's always going to be popular and is always going to be in demand, my experience is that that's just simply not true. Right, I've always felt that Wizards of the Coast, who creates Magic the Gathering, would be wise to study the history of APBA baseball, and especially the concept of reprints of APBA baseball sets and what happened to the market value of APBA sets as things were reprinted, right? Now, yeah, things will go down in value, but you cannot assume in business when you're making games and cards and whatever it is like this that you're always going to see your business go up. Especially if you're investing in this, you need to look at this and ask yourself, who are the people who are playing these games, and is it always going to go up, or is there perhaps something that will happen in the future, like say the 1994 baseball strike, that might prevent people from being interested in playing these games, in the long term. So that's really the thing that we're looking at, the thing I wanted to talk with you about today. It's a perilous business. It's really hard to guess. You're probably not going to guess right. I mean, I'm not here to give you investment advice per se, and nor am I qualified to do so. But I would advise you to be very, very careful before you decide to invest, as in buy in collectible copies of baseball cards representing different seasons. It is a game that people play with. In theory, that means that there's always some intrinsic value because it's a game. But you never know what's going to happen. What happens if a better game comes along? And that's the problem that you run into, right? What happens if instead of playing APBA cards, your kids, if they even know what baseball is, decide to play with OOTP, right? And then they pay $30 for the version and get every season. And, that's just the end of it. And then they don't have to worry about, the matrix system and all this other stuff. Is it more fun? Is it less fun? Well, that's all subjective, right? But if that's where the market's going, you probably don't want to be the one left holding the bag. Anyway, there you have it. Love to know what you think about all of this, and I'll talk with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.